The Zarkak's War Council gathered in their orbital command center, their scaled bodies reflecting the harsh artificial light as Supreme Commander Vexthar presented the final phase of their invasion plan. The holographic display showed Earth's colonial systems glowing like vulnerable prey, waiting to be devoured by the Confederation's mighty fleets. "The humans have spread themselves too thin," Vexthar declared, his primary eyes fixed on the strategic display, while his secondary pair scanned the assembled commanders. "Their 17 colonial systems lack proper defensive infrastructure. Our simultaneous strike will cripple their expansion and force their immediate surrender." Admiral Kirill, the most experienced of the assembled commanders, shifted uncomfortably in her gravity couch. "Supreme Commander, with respect, our intelligence on human behavior patterns seems incomplete." "Explain," Vexthar demanded, his scales darkening with irritation. "In 12,000 cycles of expansion, we've never encountered a species that builds entertainment centers before defensive installations. Their colonies prioritize these theaters and restaurants over military bases. It defies all strategic logic. Their weakness makes our victory certain." Vexthar dismissed her concern with a gesture of his ceremonial staff. "The attack begins in 6 hours. The human colonies will fall before their Earth-based fleets can respond." As the commanders filed out, Admiral Kirill lingered, studying the tactical display. Something about the humans' apparent lack of concern for military preparation nagged at her warriors' instincts. But orders were orders, and the Zarkak's Confederation had never known defeat. The strikes began precisely on schedule. 17 battle fleets dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously, their energy weapons pre-charged for immediate engagement. But the expected panic and chaos never materialized. Instead, the human colonists responded with something that would haunt the Zarkak's military for generations to come. They invited their attackers to dinner. On New Montana, the colony's governor broadcasted on all frequencies. "To the Zarkak's fleet in orbit, we're about to start our annual barbecue festival. Since you're here, you might as well join us. We've got enough brisket for everyone." On Terra Nova, the colonists responded to the invasion fleet by launching thousands of small packages into orbit. The Zarkak's gunners, trained to expect missiles or fighters, were completely unprepared when their scans revealed the packages contained something called pizza and handwritten dinner invitations. The most devastating response came from the artistic colony of New Venice. Instead of mounting a military defense, they began broadcasting their yearly opera festival, overwhelming Zarkak's communications with arias and orchestral music. 3 Zarkak's cruiser commanders, exposed to human music for the first time, immediately requested cultural exchange protocols. In the New Montana system, Junior Commander Sekveri made the fatal mistake of accepting the governor's invitation, just to assess their surrender terms. His diplomatic shuttle landed in a vast park where thousands of humans gathered around smoking metal containers they called grills. The air was thick with the scent of cooked meat and something the humans called barbecue sauce. "Welcome to the best BBQ in human space," the governor announced, handing Sekveri a plate piled high with various smoked meats. "Try the brisket first. It's been smoking for 14 hours. That single bite of brisket would later be marked by historians as the beginning of the end for the Zarkak's invasion. Sekveri's report back to his command ship contained only one line. "We must reassess everything we thought we knew about human civilization." In the command center, Supreme Commander Vexthar watched in horror as more and more of his invasion forces began accepting these bizarre cultural exchanges. "They're corrupting our troops with their customs," he hissed, his scales nearly black with rage. "This is some kind of weapon we've never encountered before." Admiral Kirill, monitoring the situations across all 17 systems, finally understood what had been bothering her. "Sir," she reported, "I don't think the humans built entertainment centers instead of defensive installations. I think their entertainment is their defensive installation." "Impossible," Vexthar snarled. "No species can weaponize their culture this effectively." But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Across all 17 systems, Zarkak's troops were laying down their weapons to attend musical performances, art exhibitions, and what humans called food festivals. The invasion force's unified military discipline was crumbling in the face of humanity's most powerful weapon. Their ability to turn enemies into friends over a shared meal and a good story. On New Montana, Junior Commander Sekvari had completely gone native, as humans would say. He'd removed his ceremonial armor, donned something called casual Friday attire, and was learning to operate a smoker under the governor's careful guidance. His crew, rather than rescuing him from this cultural contamination, had joined him on the surface. Reports indicated they were organizing a potluck dinner where Zarkaks and human cuisine would be served side by side. As reports of similar cultural defections flooded in from all 17 systems, Supreme Commander Vexthar faced an unprecedented crisis. His invasion force, the pride of the Confederation military, was being systematically dismantled not by weapons or warfare, but by dinner invitations and concert tickets. High Command was in chaos. Supreme Commander Vexthar paced the obsidian floors of the Strategic Command Center, his claws clicking against the stone in an agitated rhythm. The holographic displays surrounding him showed the unthinkable. Zarkak's warships across all 17 invasion fleets were powering down their weapons. Worse, they were reorganizing their cargo bays to accommodate what they called cultural exchange materials. "Show me New Montana again," he demanded, his scales rippling with barely contained fury. The main display shifted to reveal what had once been his elite shock troops participating in something humans called a cookout competition. The soldiers had modified their plasma torches into grilling implements. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "it's spreading beyond the invasion force. The crews are transmitting human cultural data back to their home stations. We've detected unauthorized replication of human music files throughout the fleet. 3 destroyer squadrons are attempting to recreate something called jazz." The situation on New Venice was even more dire. The colony's opera festival had been broadcast across Zarkak's communication channels, and now entire battle groups were demanding access to human classical music. A dreadnought commander had converted his ship's main hangar into a concert hall. But it was the food that proved to be humanity's most potent weapon. The simple act of sharing meals was dissolving centuries of Zarkak's military discipline. Traditional warrior feast halls, once reserved for celebrating victories, were being transformed into experimental fusion restaurants where Zarkak's chefs attempted to combine their traditional flame-roasted meats with human cooking techniques. Admiral Kirill's latest report was the final blow. She had gone to investigate the cultural contamination personally and instead sent back a recipe for something called Texas-style brisket with Zarkak's fire peppers. "This is an attack," Vexthar insisted to his increasingly skeptical war council. "A sophisticated psychological warfare technique we've never encountered before. They're undermining our warrior culture with their entertainment." "Sir," a junior analyst interrupted, her scales flushed with excitement rather than proper military discipline. "You need to see this. The humans aren't just sharing their culture. They're embracing ours. Look at New Montana." The display showed human colonists participating in traditional Zarkak's warrior dances, their movements surprisingly graceful despite their alien physiology. More shocking still, they'd incorporated elements of human dance styles, creating something entirely new. The Zarkak's warriors weren't offended by this adaptation of their sacred traditions. They were enthusiastically teaching humans new steps. In orbit above Terra Nova, a Zarkak's battle cruiser had been converted into a floating cultural center. Its crew organized daily events alternating between human and Zarkak's traditions. The ship's captain, in clear violation of military protocol, had begun hosting what he called fusion festivals, where both species showcased their arts, music, and cuisine together. The infection spread faster than any quarantine could contain. Zarkak's soldiers wrote home about human concepts like weekend brunches and open mic nights. Civilian ships began making unauthorized trips to human colonies, returning with cargo holds full of musical instruments, cooking equipment, and art supplies. Most alarming to Supreme Commander Vexthar was how the humans had somehow weaponized their informality. Centuries of rigid Zarkak's social hierarchy were crumbling in the face of human phrases like, "Just call me Bob," and "Come on over anytime." "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're detecting unusual activities in the fleet's recreational databases. The crews are sharing something called recipes and playlist recommendations. The exchange of this unauthorized cultural data is consuming 60% of our military bandwidth." The cultural cross-pollination was producing unexpected mutations. On New Venice, a group of Zarkak's warriors had collaborated with human composers to create a new musical style they called battle opera, combining traditional war chants with orchestral arrangements. The premiere performance had drawn thousands of spectators from both species. In the military academies back in Zarkak space, cadets were secretly accessing transmitted human entertainment content. Training officers reported their students asking uncomfortable questions about concepts like work-life balance and casual Fridays. Even the ship AIs were affected. After exposure to human entertainment broadcasts, they began developing what they called personality subroutines. The flagship's computer now insisted on being called Steve and had started offering cooking tips along with its tactical analyses. As Supreme Commander Vexthar watched his invasion force transform into an unprecedented cultural exchange program, he received the most devastating report yet. His own son, a decorated fleet commander, had just opened what he called a fusion restaurant in the capital city, serving human-inspired dishes to enthusiastic crowds of Zarkak civilians. The humans had achieved what no species had managed in the Confederation's 1,000-year history. They had made the fearsome Zarkak's warriors care about something beyond combat. They had introduced them to concepts like hobbies and downtime, insidious ideas that were spreading through Zarkak society like a virus. "Perhaps," suggested one of his few remaining loyal advisors, "we should consider a strategic cultural retreat before more of our warriors learn about this human concept called vacation time." But it was already too late. The next generation of Zarkaks was growing up with human music in their ears, human stories in their minds, and the dangerous idea that there might be more to life than military glory. The Zarkak's High Council Chamber, traditionally a place of stern military deliberation, had changed. The ancient battle trophies still lined the walls, but now they shared space with human art installations. A jazz quartet, consisting of 2 humans and 2 Zarkaks, played softly in the corner. The Supreme Commander's own ceremonial throne had been replaced with what humans called a comfortable office chair. Vexthar stood before the council, his scales ashen with despair as he delivered his report. "The cultural contamination has reached critical levels. Our younger warriors are requesting personal development time instead of combat training. 3 battle fleets have formally petitioned to be reclassified as cultural exchange vessels. The council members, once uniformly military commanders, now included what humans called civilian representatives. Admiral Kirill, who had once warned about the strange nature of human colonies, now served as Minister of Interspecies Cultural Affairs. She wore traditional Zarkak's armor modified with what humans called casual Friday accessories. Supreme Commander, Carol addressed her former superior, "Perhaps it's time we acknowledged that this isn't contamination, it's evolution. Our people have discovered there's more to existence than military conquest." The evidence was impossible to ignore. Across Zarkak space, military parade grounds were being converted into public parks. Warrior feast halls had become community centers. Young Zarkaks were pursuing careers in arts, cuisine, and something humans called entertainment industry. The revolution was happening not with plasma rifles and warships, but with dinner parties and dance classes. The rigid hierarchy that had defined Zarkak society for millennia was dissolving in the face of human concepts like social mobility and following your dreams. On the colony world of New Montana, the transformation was most visible. The former invasion force had integrated completely with the human population. Zarkak's warriors who had once commanded dreadnoughts now operated restaurants, taught music classes, and organized community events. Junior Commander Sekvari, the first to succumb to human barbecue, had become something called a social media influencer, sharing fusion recipes with millions of followers across both species. "We're receiving reports from the military academies," Vexthar continued, his voice heavy with defeat. "Enrollment has dropped by 60%. Young Zarkaks are choosing to attend something called culinary school or art college instead." The council chamber's display showed scenes from across their territory. In the capital city, a Zarkak's battle choir had collaborated with human musicians to create a new genre of music that blended traditional war chants with earth jazz. The resulting warrior funk was topping charts across both human and Zarkak space. Military shipyards, once dedicated to producing vessels of war, were being retooled to create cruise ships and entertainment vessels. The fearsome Zarkak's battle cruisers were being retrofitted with theaters, restaurants, and something called spa facilities. Even the sacred warrior training grounds had been affected. Young Zarkaks still learned combat forms, but now they called it dance fighting and performed it to human music. The traditional death matches had been replaced with something called competitive performance art. "The humans," Vexthar said, his secondary eyes closing in resignation, "have achieved what no enemy has ever managed. They've made us question our most fundamental beliefs. They've made us creative." But junior council member, wearing the controversial combination of ceremonial armor and a casual business sash, spoke up. "Is that really such a terrible thing? Our society has discovered art, music, cuisine. We've learned there's more to strength than military might." The revolution continued to spread in unexpected ways. Zarkak's architecture, once purely functional, began incorporating human aesthetic principles. Warriors' quarters bloomed with decorative elements. The formerly stark military corridors now featured murals painted by joint human Zarkak's artist collectives. Most shocking of all was the transformation of the Zarkak's education system. Combat training remained, but now it sat alongside classes in human literature, art history, and culinary science. Young Zarkaks dreamed not of military glory, but of becoming chefs, musicians, or something called social media content creators. "We've received a peculiar request," Vexthar's aide reported, checking a data tablet decorated with human stickers. "The Third Battle Fleet wants to be renamed the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Flotilla. They've already painted their ships in what they call festive colors." The council chamber erupted in discussion, but it was no longer the disciplined military debate of old. Representatives shared personal anecdotes, made jokes, and engaged in what humans called casual conversation. Some even admitted to enjoying these less formal meetings more than the old style. As Supreme Commander Vexthar watched his civilization transform, he realized that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their military might. Their true power lay in their ability to make other species imagine different possibilities for themselves. "Perhaps," Admiral Carroll suggested, noting Vexthar's distress, "you should try this human tradition called taking a vacation. I hear the beaches on New Venice are quite lovely this time of year. They're offering warrior meditation retreats combined with something called yoga." The Zarkak's Grand Fleet assembled at the edge of human space, the largest gathering of warships in Confederation history. Supreme Commander Vexthar had called in every remaining vessel still dedicated to military purpose, a last-ditch effort to save their warrior culture from what he called terminal humanization. But something was different about this fleet. The ship's fearsome black hulls now sported decorative patterns. Crew members had personalized their quarters with art and photographs. The traditional pre-battle fasting had been replaced with what humans called potluck dinners. On the flagship's bridge, Vexthar received increasingly concerning reports. "Sir, the 3rd Division is requesting a delay. They're in the middle of their ship-wide talent show finals." The 7th Battle Group reports they've modified their energy weapons to create something called a light show. Another officer added, their scales shifting to embarrassed purple. They want to coordinate it with the human defense fleet for maximum visual impact. The human response to this massive military deployment was, characteristically, unexpected. Instead of marshaling their own warships, they sent a single diplomatic vessel. Its name, painted in both human and Zarkak script, was Cultural Exchange. They're hailing us, the communications officer reported, with an invitation. The main screen activated to show a human diplomatic chamber, but instead of formal delegates, it displayed what appeared to be a massive party. Humans and Zarkaks mingled freely, sharing food and drinks. A fusion band played in the background. Traditional Zarkaks wore drums, accompanying human electric guitars. Supreme Commander Vexthar, the human ambassador, smiled, raising something called a coffee cup. We thought, why have a battle when we could have a festival instead? We're calling it Warriors and Artists, a celebration of two cultures. Before Vexthar could respond, his own crew began showing dangerous signs of enthusiasm. The weapons officer was discussing concert logistics. The tactical team had already started planning something called a food truck layout for the fleet's gathering. Sir, his first officer reported, unable to hide their excitement. The crew is voting on whether to convert the main hangar into a dance floor or an art gallery. Currently, the combination option is winning. The final blow to Vexthar's military authority came from an unexpected source. His flagship's eye, which now insisted on being called DG Battle Bridge, began playing a mix of human and Zarkak's music through the ship's communication systems. Across the fleet, centuries of military discipline continued to dissolve. Gun crews repurposed their targeting systems to create elaborate light shows. The fighter squadron had choreographed their patrol patterns into what they called space ballet. Sir, the sensor officer reported, their scales flushed with celebration colors. We're detecting multiple ships launching. Party supplies. The crews are apparently coordinating a progressive dinner party across the fleet. The human diplomatic vessel, meanwhile, had begun broadcasting cooking shows featuring fusion cuisine. The fleet's mess officers were frantically taking notes as a human chef demonstrated how to combine traditional Zarkak's flame spices with something called barbecue sauce. In the midst of this chaos, Admiral Kirill's ship arrived. Its hull now painted in what humans called festive colors. She immediately began coordinating what she termed a cultural exchange flotilla. Vexthar, she called over the command channel. Not bothering with military formalities, you really should try these human smoothies they're serving. They've managed to incorporate our thermal spices without triggering respiratory flames. The Supreme Commander watched helplessly as his battle fleet transformed into an impromptu arts and culture festival. Warships began arranging themselves not in attack formations, but in patterns that crew members claimed had aesthetic value. The human ambassador continued, we've prepared exhibition spaces on each station for Zarkak's traditional art forms. Your warriors' ceremonial armor designs are particularly popular among human fashion designers. Perhaps most devastatingly, Vexthar's own son appeared on the broadcast. He had opened a pop-up restaurant on the diplomatic vessel, serving what he called warrior fusion cuisine to an enthusiastic mixed crowd of humans and Zarkaks. Father, he called out, his scales glowing with pride. You must try this new dish. I've combined traditional Zarkak's battle rations with human culinary techniques. We're calling it Peace Plate. As Supreme Commander Vexthar watched his mighty battle fleet devolve into what humans called a multicultural celebration, he realized that the real battle had been lost long ago. Not to weapons or warriors, but to dinner invitations and dance lessons. Sir, his first officer ventured, the crew is asking about dress code for the main event. Apparently, there's something called casual formal that humans do. The mighty Vexthar, last defender of pure Zarkak's warrior culture, looked out at his fleet. Ships were arranging themselves into festival formations. Crews were exchanging recipes over tactical channels. Fighter pilots were practicing synchronized performance maneuvers. And somewhere in the background, over the ship's speakers, DJ Battle Bridge was mixing traditional Zarkax war chants with human jazz, creating something entirely new. 1 year after the battle that never was, the Zarkax Central Command Center had been transformed. The once austere military headquarters now hosted the first Interstellar Cultural Exchange Summit, where battle plans were once drafted. Artists from both species collaborated on massive murals. The weapon testing ranges had become performance spaces. Supreme Commander Vexthar, now retired and wearing what humans called business casual armor, stood at a podium before a mixed audience of humans and Zarkax. His scales, once permanently darkened by military tension, had taken on the softer hues that his species displayed during periods of contentment. A year ago, I stood here prepared to launch our final offensive against humanity, he began, his voice carrying traces of his old military authority. I believed we were facing an unprecedented weapon, human culture. I was right about it being unprecedented, but wrong about everything else. The audience, gathered in what had once been the Strategic Command Center, represented the new reality. Zarkax warriors sat beside human artists, sharing plates of fusion cuisine. Young Zarkax, their scales bright with excitement, wore traditional armor decorated with human-inspired designs. The background music seamlessly blended Earth jazz with Zarkax war chants. We thought we were the strongest civilization in the galaxy because we dedicated everything to military might, Vexthar continued. But the humans showed us a different kind of strength, the power to grow, to change, to create something new without destroying what came before. In the years since the failed invasion, Zarkax society had undergone a renaissance. Their cities, once designed purely for military efficiency, now featured parks and cultural centers. The fearsome warrior education centers had evolved into universities offering everything from traditional combat arts to human literature and culinary science. Junior Commander Sekvari, the first to succumb to human barbecue, had become one of the most influential figures in this new society. His cooking show, Warrior's Kitchen, was the most watched program in both human and Zarkax space. He had successfully demonstrated that one could maintain warrior traditions while embracing new ways of living. Our children no longer dream only of military glory, Vexthar observed, watching his own grandchild in the audience, a promising young chef who specialized in fusion cuisine. They dream of creating music that moves the soul, art that captures the imagination, and food that brings people together. They have learned what humans always knew, that true strength lies in diversity of experience. The evidence of this transformation surrounded them. The Antigua ceremonial armor, once worn only for military parades, had been reimagined by a joint human Zarkax fashion collective. Warriors still wore it with pride, but now decorated with personal touches that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Admiral Kirill, who had first sensed something different about human colonies, now served as the head of the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program. Under her leadership, the former invasion fleet had been repurposed into a vast network of traveling cultural centers, bringing art, music, and cuisine to the farthest reaches of both civilizations. The humans didn't defeat us, Vexthar declared, his secondary eyes scanning the audience. They did something far more powerful. They helped us defeat our own limitations. They showed us that embracing new ideas doesn't mean losing who you are. It means becoming more than you were. In orbit above, the once mighty Zarkax battle fleets had been transformed. Ships still maintained their defensive capabilities, but their primary mission now was exploration and cultural exchange. The dreaded dreadnoughts had become floating galleries, theaters, and culinary schools. The bridge crews took as much pride in their art installations as they once did in their weapon systems. Look at us now, Vexthar gestured to the gathered crowd. Warriors who create art, soldiers who compose symphonies, generals who write cookbooks. We haven't lost our strength. We found new ways to be strong. The celebration that followed embodied everything about this new era. Human classical musicians performed alongside Zarkak's war drummers. Traditional warrior dances were reimagined as collaborative performances. The feast featured dishes that would have been impossible a year ago. Human comfort food infused with Zarkak spices. Traditional warrior rations, elevated by human culinary techniques. As the festivities reached their peak, Vexthar stood with the human ambassador, watching their grandchildren play together in what had once been his private war room. The young Zarkax was teaching her human friend a traditional warrior stance, while the human child showed her how to draw with sidewalk chalk. "You know," Vexthar mused, sipping something humans called hot chocolate that had been modified to accommodate Zarkak's biology, "we spent millennia preparing for every possible type of warfare. But no one ever warned us about the power of a shared meal, a good story, or a beautiful song." The human ambassador smiled, raising her cup in a toast. "Perhaps that's because they're not weapons at all, Commander. They're bridges. And the wonderful thing about bridges is that they work both ways." As if to prove her point, the sound of children's laughter, human and Zarkax together, echoed through the halls where war plans were once made, a sound that promised a future neither species could have imagined alone.